Max was sitting at his cluttered desk, papers and books scattered everywhere. The faint sound of a ticking clock echoed in the room as he scribbled notes in his journal. "Being a detective isn't easy," he muttered to himself, "but you know what's even harder? Reading clues in a language you barely understand." Suddenly, a knock on the door broke the silence. Startled, Max looked up as an envelope was slid under the door. It was plain, except for his name written neatly in bold, black letters. "Max Taylor," he read aloud, then frowned. Who could this be from? He tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The message was short but puzzling. "Meet me at the park at 5 p.m. Bring the key." Max furrowed his brow. "Meet me? Bring the key? What key?" He sighed heavily and turned to face the audience directly, a look of frustration on his face. "Hi there. I'm Max, and as you can see, I've got a bit of a situation here. This letter is in English, and, well, let's just say English isn't my strongest skill." He leaned forward, holding up the letter. "But don't worry. With your help, I think we can solve this. Together, we're going to break it down and figure out what it means." Max began pointing to the first phrase, speaking slowly. "Let's start with meet me. Do you know what that means? It's a way to tell someone to come and see you. Like this, meet me at the cafe, or meet me after class. Try saying it with me. Meet me. Good. Now, what about at the park? This means the location where we're meeting. Let's repeat that too, at the park." As Max continued, he circled the next part of the note with his pen. "And what about bring the key?" Bring is when you ask someone to carry something with them. For example, bring your book to class or bring your jacket. It's cold outside. So here it says to bring the key. What key are they talking about? I have no idea, but we'll figure it out. He paused and smiled. Okay, so now we've got this part. Meet me at the park at 5 p.m. That's a specific time. 5 p.m. means 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's put it all together. Meet me at the park at 5 p.m. Bring the key. Max sat back, tapping his chin thoughtfully. Whoever sent this letter definitely wants something from me, but I don't know who they are. I guess I'll have to go to the park and find out. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and picked up a small ring of keys from his desk. Turning to the audience again, he said, "Let's head out. Oh, and don't forget to repeat the phrases we learned today whenever you can. Practice makes perfect." As Max opened the door to leave, he glanced at the letter one last time. "This could be the start of something big," he muttered, stepping into the street. The sun hung low in the sky as Max walked briskly through the streets, the letter clutched in his hand. His thoughts were racing. Who sent the note? What was so important about the key? And why meet at the park? He shook his head. "I guess I'll find out soon enough," he murmured. The city buzzed with life around him, cars honking, people chatting on the sidewalks, and street vendors calling out their wares. Max passed by a small cafe and hesitated. He glanced at his watch. It was 4:30 p.m. "I've got some time," he said, stepping inside. The cafe was cozy, with the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Max approached the counter, where a friendly barista greeted him. "Hi there, what can I get you?" she asked. Max hesitated. Coffee? Black?" The barista smiled. "Sure thing. Anything else?" Max shook his head. "No, thanks." As he waited for his coffee, Max turned to the audience. "Here's a tip. When you don't know what to say, keep it simple. A phrase like 'no thanks' is polite and works almost anywhere." The barista handed him his drink, and Max paid before finding a seat by the window. He pulled out the letter again, reading it over for the 100th time. "Meet me at the park at 5 p.m. Bring the key." He traced the words with his finger. "It's so simple, but so mysterious. I feel like I'm missing something." Max took a sip of his coffee and looked around. The cafe was quiet, with only a few other customers scattered at tables. His eyes landed on a young woman sitting in the corner, typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up and caught his gaze. "Need some help?" she asked, her tone light and curious. Max hesitated. Should he tell her? Finally, he decided to take a chance. "Actually, yeah," he said, holding up the letter. "I got this note, but I'm not sure what to make of it." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Let me see." She read the letter quickly, then nodded. "It's pretty straightforward. Meet me is just asking you to come to the park. At 5 p.m. means the time 5 o'clock in the evening. And bring the key, well, that part's self-explanatory." Max smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I got that much. But the thing is, I don't know who sent it or what key they're talking about." The woman tilted her head thoughtfully. "Do you have a lot of keys?" Max pulled out the small ring of keys from his pocket and held it up. "Just these, but I don't know which one they mean." The woman pointed to a brass key on the ring. "That one looks interesting. Maybe it's that?" Max studied the key she had indicated. It was old, with an ornate design that made it stand out from the rest. "Maybe," he said, slipping the keys back into his pocket. "Thanks for the help." "Oh, what's your name?" "Amy," she said, smiling. "And you?" "Max." "Well, Max," Amy said, closing her laptop and standing up. "I've got some time to kill. Mind if I tag along? I love a good mystery." Max was surprised but nodded. "Sure, 2 heads are better than 1, right?" As they left the cafe, Amy glanced at the letter again. "You know, this is a great opportunity to practice your English. If you're going to solve this, you'll need to ask a lot of questions. Let's start with something simple. Excuse me, can you help me?" Max repeated the phrase, his pronunciation a little hesitant. "Excuse me, can you help me?" "Perfect," Amy said. "You'll need that one for sure." The park was only a short walk away, and the sun was beginning to set as they arrived. It was a peaceful scene, children playing on the grass, joggers passing by, and couples strolling hand in hand. Amy looked around. "Okay, So, where do we start? Max pulled out the letter again. The fountain, maybe. It's the most obvious landmark. Amy nodded. Good idea. Let's go. As they walked toward the fountain, Max practiced the phrase Amy had taught him. Excuse me, can you help me? That's it, Amy encouraged. Just remember to say it with confidence. They reached the fountain, a large marble structure with water cascading down its sides. A man in a suit was sitting on a nearby bench, reading a newspaper. Go on, Amy whispered, nudging Max. Max approached the man, his heart pounding. Excuse me, can you help me? The man lowered his newspaper and looked up. Help you? With what? Max held up the letter. Do you know who sent this? The man squinted at the paper, then shook his head. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe try asking at the playground. Max thanked him and walked back to Amy. He said to try the playground, he reported. Amy smiled. See? That wasn't so bad, was it? No, Max admitted. I guess not. They headed toward the playground, where a group of children were playing under the watchful eyes of their parents. Max scanned the area, looking for anyone who might have a clue. Amy pointed to a woman sitting on a bench nearby. She looks like she's waiting for someone. Maybe you should ask. Her. Max nodded and walked over. Excuse me, can you help me? He asked. The woman looked up and smiled. Of course. What do you need? Max showed her the letter. Do you know who sent this? The woman studied the paper, then shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't. But if I were you, I'd check near the old oak tree. It's a popular meeting spot. Thank you, Max said, turning back to Amy. As they walked toward the oak tree, Max felt a surge of confidence. He had successfully used his English skills to ask for help, and it was working. Amy smiled at him. You're doing great, Max. Just keep going. We'll figure this out. Max glanced at the letter again. The old oak tree. I have a feeling we're getting closer. The old oak tree stood at the far end of the park, its massive branches stretching out like arms welcoming visitors. The area was quieter, with fewer people around, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the ground. There it is, Amy said, pointing ahead. If someone wanted to leave a message or clue, this would be the perfect spot. Max nodded, his eyes scanning the area. The tree was surrounded by a small clearing, and at its base there was a wooden bench. On the bench sat a small folded piece of paper. Do you see that? Max asked, quickening his pace. Amy followed closely behind. Looks like another clue. Max reached the bench first and carefully picked up the paper. It was folded neatly, just like the letter he'd received earlier. He opened it and read aloud. The key will open more than a door. Look beneath the fountain's roar. Amy leaned over his shoulder, reading the message again. Beneath the fountain? That's interesting. Max frowned. What key? And why the fountain? This is getting stranger by the minute. Amy smiled. Well, we've got our next destination. Back to the fountain? Max folded the note and stuffed it into his pocket. Back to the fountain, he agreed. The walk back was quicker, as Max and Amy were both eager to uncover the next part of the mystery. The park was quieter now, with only a few joggers passing by, and the occasional sound of laughter from the playground. When they reached the fountain, Max hesitated. The fountain was large, with water cascading down several tiers into a wide, shallow basin. There were coins scattered at the bottom, glinting in the fading light. Amy tilted, her head studying the fountain. So what now? Do we just look underneath it? Max scratched his head. I guess so. But how? Amy pointed to the base of the fountain, where a narrow stone ledge jutted out just above the water. Maybe there's something hidden along the edge. Let's take a closer look. They walked around the fountain, examining every inch of the ledge. After a few minutes, Amy let out a small gasp. Max, over here. Max hurried over to where Amy was, crouched down, pointing to a small metal lockbox wedged between the stones. It was partially hidden by the cascading water, making it nearly invisible unless you were looking directly at it. Good eye, Max said, reaching out to grab the box. It was cool to the touch and surprisingly heavy for its size. There was a small keyhole on the front. Amy grinned. I think it's time to use that key of yours. Max pulled the ring of keys from his pocket and searched for the ornate brass key they had discussed earlier. He slid it into the keyhole and turned it with a satisfying click. The box opened easily, revealing its contents, a small notebook and another folded piece of paper. Max picked up the notebook first, flipping through its pages. It was filled with handwritten notes, all in English. Some pages had simple phrases like, "Where is the library?" and "Can I help you?" while others had more detailed passages, as if someone had been practicing their writing. This looks like a language journal, Max said, holding it up for Amy to see. Amy nodded. Whoever sent you this must have been trying to help you with your English. Max looked puzzled, but why all the secrecy? Why not just give it to me directly? Amy shrugged. Maybe the other note will explain. Max unfolded the paper and began reading aloud. Max, I know you've been struggling with English, and I wanted to help. This journal was my way of sharing some of the tips and phrases that helped me when I was learning. Use it well and don't give up. You're smarter than you think, and you'll get there. P.S. The journal is yours to keep. But if you want more help, meet me back at the oak tree tomorrow at noon. Max's eyes widened. Wait. So this was all just to give me a notebook? Why not just hand it to me? Amy laughed. Maybe they wanted to make it memorable. Or maybe they knew you'd learn more by going through the process. Max looked down at the journal in his hands. The handwriting was neat, almost familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Whoever had sent the notes had clearly put a lot of thought into this. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Max and Amy sat on the bench near the fountain, flipping through the pages of the journal. Each entry was filled with practical tips, example sentences, and encouragement. Amy pointed to one page. Look at this. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a chance to learn. That's great advice. Max nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe they're right. I've been so focused on not messing up that I haven't given myself a chance to improve. Amy smiled. Well, you've already made a lot of progress today. You asked for help, used new phrases, and even solved a mystery. I'd say that's a win, Max chuckled. Yeah, I guess it is. He closed the journal and stood up, slipping it into his bag. Whoever left. This for me, I think I owe them a thank you. Tomorrow, I'll go back to the oak tree and see if I can find them. Amy stood up as well, stretching her arms. Sounds like a plan. Want some company? Max grinned. Sure, 2 heads are better than 1, right? That night, Max sat at his small kitchen table, the language journal open in front of him. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet apartment as he flipped through the pages again, carefully reading each entry. The journal was divided into sections. The first part was filled with basic phrases and their translations, neatly written out with simple examples. The second part had short stories and dialogues, with phrases underlined and small notes in the margins. One phrase caught Max's eye. Practice makes progress. The word progress was underlined, and next to it, the writer had added, "It doesn't have to be perfect, just try." Max sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's easier said than done, he murmured. But as he thought about the events of the day, meeting Amy, solving the clues, and asking strangers for help, he realized he had done exactly that. He had tried. He turned to the next section of the journal, titled Daily Practice. It listed simple activities to do every day. 1. Listen to one English song and write down the lyrics. 2. Read a short paragraph and highlight new words. 3. Speak at least 3 sentences in English, even if only to yourself. Max smiled faintly. It was practical advice, nothing too overwhelming. I can do this, he said, closing the journal and setting it aside. The next morning, Max woke up feeling determined. He made himself a simple breakfast, toast and eggs, and sat down with the journal again. Following its advice, he started his day with an English song. He searched online for one of the songs he remembered hearing at the cafe the day before. The lyrics were upbeat and repetitive, making them easy to follow. As the song played, Max paused it after each line, repeating the words and writing them down in a notebook. I'll be there. I'll be there for you. He sang softly, his pronunciation improving with each attempt. When he was done, he read over the lyrics he had written. Some words were unfamiliar, but instead of feeling discouraged, he looked them up. The act of learning felt satisfying. By mid-morning, Max was ready to head back to the park. He grabbed his bag, making sure the journal was safely inside, and stepped out into the crisp, sunny day. As he walked, he thought about the person who had gone to such lengths to help him. Was it someone he knew? A friend? A teacher? Or maybe even a stranger who had noticed his struggles? When he reached the park, It was just before noon. The area around the oak tree was quiet, with only a few people strolling nearby. Max sat on the bench, his hands resting on the journal in his lap. Amy arrived a few minutes later, her cheerful energy lighting up the otherwise calm scene. "Hey, Max, ready to solve the final piece of this mystery?" Max smiled. "I think so. Thanks for coming." Amy sat down beside him, glancing at the journal. "Did you read through more of it?" "Yeah," Max said, nodding. "It's actually really helpful." "Whoever wrote this knew exactly what I needed." Amy grinned. "Well, let's see if we can thank them in person." As noon approached, Max and Amy scanned the area, watching for anyone who might approach the tree. For a while, no one came, and Max began to wonder if the note had been a prank after all. But then, a figure appeared in the distance, walking toward them with a steady, purposeful stride. It was a middle-aged man, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans. He carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Max stood up as the man approached. "Excuse me," he began. "Are you the one who—" The man held up a hand, smiling warmly. "Yes, Max, it was me." Max blinked in surprise. The man looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place him. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man said, his tone gentle. Max shook his head. "I'm sorry, no." The man chuckled. "That's okay. I'm Mr. Carter. I was your English tutor a few years ago." Max's eyes widened. "Mr. Carter? I remember now. You helped me with my English when I first moved." "Here," Mr. Carter nodded. "I did, and I noticed recently that you've been struggling again. I wanted to remind you that you're capable of more than you think." Max looked down at the journal in his hands. "So this was your idea?" "Yes," Mr. Carter said. "I thought a little adventure might motivate you, and it seems to have worked." Max smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over him. "Thank you, really. This means a lot." Mr. Carter clapped a hand on Max's shoulder. "You're welcome. But remember, the real credit goes to you. You took the first step by trying." Amy, who had been watching the exchange quietly, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, this was a brilliant idea. Max has been practicing his English nonstop since yesterday." Mr. Carter smiled. "That's great to hear. Keep it up, Max, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. You've got people who want to see you succeed." Max nodded. "I won't forget." The next few days marked the beginning of a new chapter for Max. Every morning, he followed the advice from the journal, turning its suggestions into a routine. He started his day with music, carefully listening to the lyrics and repeating the lines until they sounded right. He practiced conversations in front of the mirror, imagining different scenarios, ordering at a cafe, asking for directions, or chatting with a friend. Amy often joined him in the park after work, helping him refine his pronunciation and build his confidence. They made a game out of it, where Amy would point to random objects, and Max had to name them in English and use them in a sentence. "Bench," Max said one evening, pointing to the familiar spot under the oak tree. "This is my favorite bench in the park." Amy grinned. "Perfect. Now what about the fountain?" Max glanced toward the fountain in the distance. "The fountain is very beautiful. Many people throw coins into it." "Excellent," Amy said, giving him a thumbs up. "See, you're getting better every day," Max laughed. "It's not as scary when I just try." One afternoon, as Max was flipping through the journal, he came across a section labeled Real-Life Challenges. It suggested ways to practice English in everyday situations, like ordering food, asking for help at a store, or introducing yourself to someone new. Max decided to test himself. The following day, he walked into a local bakery. The smell of freshly baked bread and pastries filled the air as he approached the counter. "Hello," he said, his voice steady. "Can I have one croissant, please?" The cashier smiled. "Of course. Anything else?" Max hesitated for a moment but quickly remembered a phrase he had practiced. "No, thank you." "That's all." The transaction was simple, but as Max walked out of the bakery with his croissant in hand, he felt a surge of pride. It was a small victory, but it marked a big step forward. Later that week, Max decided to revisit the cafe where he and Amy had solved the first clue. He sat at the same table by the window, sipping a cup of tea and observing the conversations around him. Nearby, a young couple was chatting in English. Max listened closely, picking up on familiar words and phrases. He couldn't understand everything, but he caught enough to get the gist of their conversation. "Practice makes progress," he reminded himself, repeating the phrase from the journal. Feeling bold, Max opened his notebook and began writing a short story in English. It was simple, about a boy who finds a hidden treasure in the woods, but it allowed him to use new words and expressions he had learned. As he wrote, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, are you writing a story?" Max looked up to see a woman about his age, holding a coffee cup and smiling warmly. "Yes," Max said, feeling a bit nervous. I am practicing English." "That's amazing," the woman said. "I'm an English teacher. If you ever need help, feel free to ask." Max's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? That's very kind. Thank you." The woman nodded. "Keep it up. You're doing great." Over time, Max began to notice the changes in himself. Words that once felt foreign now rolled off his tongue more easily. Conversations that used to intimidate him now felt manageable. One evening, as he sat on the bench near the oak tree, Amy joined him with a wide grin. "Guess what?" she said, holding up her phone. "What?" Max asked, curious. "I signed us up for a local language exchange event," Amy said. "It's this Saturday. You'll get to practice with native speakers and other learners." Max hesitated. "I don't know. What if I make mistakes?" Amy placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will make mistakes, and that's okay. Remember what the journal said? Every mistake is a chance to learn." Max took a deep breath. "All right. Let's do it. The language exchange event was held at a cozy community center with tables set up for small group discussions. Max and Amy were greeted by a friendly organizer who handed them name tags and explained how the event worked. Each group had a mix of native speakers and learners, and participants were encouraged to switch tables every 15 minutes to meet new people. Max's first table included a retired teacher, a college student, and a fellow English learner from Brazil. The conversation started slowly, but as Max grew more comfortable, he found himself contributing more. "I am from Korea," he said, carefully pronouncing each word. "I moved here 2 years ago." "That's great," the retired teacher said. "And what do you like about living here?" Max paused, searching for the right words. "I like the park. It is peaceful, and the people are very kind." The group smiled, encouraging him to continue. By the end of the event, Max was exhausted but proud. He had spoken more English in one evening than he had in weeks, and the positive feedback from others had boosted his confidence. As he and Amy walked home, she turned to him with a smile. "You were amazing tonight." "I'm so proud of you," Max grinned. "Thanks, Amy. I think I'm starting to enjoy this." A few days later, Max returned to the oak tree, journal in hand. He sat on the bench, flipping through the pages and reflecting on how far he had come. When Mr. Carter appeared, Max stood up to greet him. "Mr. Carter," he said, smiling, "thank you again." "The journal, it's changed everything," Mr. Carter nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. But remember, the journal was just the starting point. The real work was all you." Max looked down at the journal, running his fingers over its worn cover. "I won't stop here. I want to keep learning, keep improving." Mr. Carter smiled. "That's the spirit. Keep going, Max, and if you ever need help, you know where to find me." As Max walked away from the park that day, he felt a sense of accomplishment and determination. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it head on. With the support of his friends, the guidance of the journal, and his own perseverance, Max knew he could conquer any challenge. He looked up at the clear blue sky, a smile spreading across his face. "One step at a time," he said softly, his voice steady and full of hope.